Hey, what's up everyone? It's Vincenzo, and I'm bringing y'all another Legends video. Although, today we're going to do something a little different. As I'm sure all of you have noticed, I haven't really been uploading as much real content in general, but mostly Legends content like I used to. A few reasons for that. The first is that I've gone back to work because I'm now off of paternity leave. I got 3 paid months off. It was nice or whatever, but you don't have to go back to work and deal with that. But the second reason is just kind of in general. I've been fatigued by this game. I found it hard not only to just to find the time to play and record, but also just to want to record. And while that first reason of going back to work, that's that plays into it. Uh, it's that's more of the physical standpoint of it, because even with my weird work schedule, which is weird to explain to most people. For those of you who don't know, I'm in the Coast Guard, right? And my schedule basically is I go to work for 2 days and I literally stay there for 2 days. I sleep and eat and do everything there for 2 days. And if I'm there on the weekends, I'm there for 3 days. So over 2 weeks, I'm literally eating and sleeping and living at work for one of those entire weeks, the way that it shapes out. So when you expand that to the whole year, I literally spend half of the year physically at work, which essentially means that I have half the time to seriously grind this game. Because even yesterday, I was just at work. I was doing stuff all day until about 5 p.m. And by that point, I'm like, dude, I'm tired. I don't even if I wanted to play, I'm just too tired to right now. Or you record for this, which I used to do. I used to record some videos while I was at work, but even that is just a little bit too much sometimes. But before, I guess lately, even with all that kind of stuff going on, I did have enough fun with this game that I could play it literally all day and night. Especially if I was off, I would be up until 4 in the morning, no matter how much I won or lost. I could just play this game constantly. It just did not bother me. But yeah, that's just not the case as of lately. And I've talked about it in Schwartz Discord server with others, but I'm especially lately, I'm just at a point where I want to goof off, and just make fun videos. But I just can't bring myself to play ranked and competitive games anymore, just because of how just how it feels the game is right now. But what do I mean about that? Other than the obvious problem of there not being any new cards, basically the entire time that I've been playing, so nearly, 3 going on 4 years, hardly anyone playing the game now in 2023 is really creative enough to come up with anything new. There's very few people, and everyone pretty much runs the same decks with very little variance. Someone in Schwartz's server, C City Toker, I think he was at least in the conversation, but made a really good point. It's either hyper aggro or hyper control. There's really nothing in between. Every now and then you'll get a combo deck, all that stuff. So today I want to do something different because there's a number of cards, and pretty much a lot of them are from Jaws of Oblivion, that expansion. So I wanted to talk about that the cards there that I believe are the biggest problem, especially now that we've had so long to play with them and nothing new has come out, no new kind of interactions. And if anyone at Sparky Pants is listening, they should change some of these if they ever plan on another update, or if the game ever starts to get content again. If the game just comes out of maintenance mode magically one day, which I know we're all hoping for, but if that ever happens, I would give these cards a really good look. And for some of them, I think I have some ideas on how they could be fixed, or certain mechanics. The big one, because we're talking about Jaws of Oblivion. on how they could be fixed and more balanced to what had come before, what could have basically built on what was already there. So now I'm just going to throw in the obligatory, this is my own opinion and all that. Okay, so since we're talking about Jaws of Oblivion, we're just going to start off with everyone's favorite mechanic, Invade. Now, personally, I don't have as much of an issue with Invade as, a lot of other people do. My main reason for not having a big problem is that it's generally very easy to tell when you've won or lost to it very early. It's obviously not always like that, but generally Invade players will go all in on the mechanic to the point that, like, if you answer it early enough, then they really only have a few options to get back in the game with, their bullshit. But on the flip side, if they invade like 4 or 5 times and you've only been able to play like 2 creatures and you just don't have like an answer for the gate to slow them down, then that's when you've lost. If you don't have an answer to the board, the gate itself, or both, then probably at that point you've lost, and that's generally very early on because they snowball very quickly. So it makes for a very quick game that you can just get out of, which is why I don't have a problem with it. It's not as like a really huge waste of time generally, but we're gonna talk more about Invade. So the gate is immune to silence. It's permanently shackled, so it's not going to attack. And at level 1, we're gonna ignore the immune to silence permanently shackled for all these because that stays the same. So at level 1, when you summon a Daedra, it gives +1 health. Level 2, so every time you invade, it goes up a level. For anyone who, if you're just getting the game or something, I don't know, if you just started playing, or you somehow managed to find this video, that's what it does. Every time you play an invade card, it levels up the Oblivion Gate. If you don't have a Oblivion Gate, then the first invade will summon it, but if you're playing a card that has multiple invades on it, then it will summon it for the first invade and then, go to whatever levels past that card's going to be able to do. So at level 2, when you summon a Daedra, it gets +1 attack and +1 health. When you summon a Daedra, same buffs as before, but now they cost 1 less. And then level 4 on, when you summon a Daedra, you give it a random keyword. And level 5, 2 keywords, level 6, 3, so on, so forth. Whatever level it is, I think it would be like 10 or 11. That's when they just get every keyword in the game and they become mini dig authors. So that's what Invade does in general as a mechanic. But now we're going to talk about some of the actual cards that I think are more annoying to deal with when it comes to Invade. Okay, so when it comes to Invade, there's a few cards that I think feel really unfair when they come down most of the time. And the first one is Sigil Keeper. And you're probably wondering why, like, out of all the Invade cards, I'm first talking about this one. So sometimes the gate getting a ward like that early on, or just at the wrong time, just makes it so much more annoying to get rid of. Like, you can have the right creatures on board to answer that gate, even if you're, like, you could have put down the right amount of creatures with the right amount of attack to even take out the gate if your opponent invaded another time or two. Because I didn't mention this just now, but every time you invade, the gate gets like 2 more health. So you can even plan ahead for how many times they might invade and throw down even more powerful creatures a lot of the time. But the ward can really just stop that and, can like allow them to continue to snowball, and it just generally annoys the hell out of me. So the next one is Widow Daedra, but only when the invade player is like already so far ahead, because this is aggressively statted. Like, honestly, like this one's stats don't really like matter all too much. Really, it's if they're ahead on the board because you're playing something slower, or they just had enough to get rid of whatever you did put down. This can just steamroll you immediately, especially if they can break 2 or 3 runes and invade 3 or 4 times. Because they can invade those 2 or 3 times when they break those 2 or 3 runes. They've likely already invaded at least once before, and then at that point, they're gonna invade has so many one cost invasion cards or even less that they can invade even more and just really push you out of the game really fast, and they can drop down if they have the ring or something and it's turn 5, they play this, they invade a few times, they can play potentially a 2-cost creature that got reduced because the gate is now level 3 or 4, and it's also going to get keywords, which is kind of just insane. This is the kind of card that just blows you out of the water completely. Now another one is Keeper of the Gates. I mean, this guy can just be really obnoxious, and really by itself, if this is the only thing that they can play, it's really not the worst thing. But there's a lot more cards that I'm about to get into that just combo in a really offensive way. So I'm going to get to those right here. So Invasion Party is just ridiculous. I mean, your opponent can get a really chunky gate down and make all their Daedra cost 1 less with just 1 card. And like I said earlier, there's a ton of cheap invade creatures that you can just spam out very quickly after this. Sure, in a 3-color invade deck, it's going to be a little harder for them to have this and then multiple of the 1-cost invade guys. But even just one of them, because this, you can invade 3 times with this card. Get it to where your Daedra costs 1 less, so those 1-cost invade guys now cost 0. Then they invade, and you're already getting keywords. You already have a level 4 gate with 2 cards. So the setup that this just allows is just really insane, and it just takes way less setup than an invade deck would need. Maybe this is why it's a legendary card, but for that same reason, it's also why this card, it gets banned in tournaments. I know especially tournaments that NPO hosts. I'm sure in other ones, other than just downright banning invade, they'll ban at least this card. This is just a stupid ability that can just snowball, and it shoves your opponent so hard out of the game if they don't have an answer to the gate. Now, Forces of Destruction isn't nearly as bad as Invasion Party, at least to me, because at least it's for sure it's going to be a late game card. So it really, it's not really going to be pushing out of the game as likely as Invasion Party is, most of the time at least. However, this is basically a conscription for Daedra, and those Daedra don't even have to be in your deck, because it's just random Daedra. You could summon 5 2-cost Daedra if, it just depends on your board state. Or you could summon, what's the 10 cost? You can summon Markinez if that's if you only have 1 spot on the board. And you'll probably just win that way. But the fact that this has the potential to summon so many of the little Daedra in one go, it's not impossible for this thing to invade. I don't know, what is it, 9 times? Which pretty much immediately gets you to the point where you have the absurd keywords. But the only time, so most of the time I think this card is generally kind of bad, because most of the time, by the time this card comes down, the way that most invade players play is they blow through their hand very quickly. And if you stabilize and you've had a few turns to stabilize, get the board back, and you're probably gaining health back because they were so aggro trying to kill you really quickly because they, played all their cards. In that case, this wouldn't be that hard to deal with because it's probably just going to summon a bunch of little guys, and or you have removal if it happens to summon the one big, like Dramora that you're not like really hoping for them to summon. Other than that, the only time that this card is really strong is if it's been a constant uphill battle with Invade, where you're not just drawing hard removal for the gates, or basically if it's just going back and forth and like neither of you has been able to really take control of the board. That's really the only time that this is good, because then this like just really like requires, this puts so much on the board that requires specific answers that it's hard for a lot of decks to kind of come back from something like this, especially if a lot of resources have been spent during that time. Okay, so with all that being said, and you also have to know that your opponent doesn't necessarily even have to draw like any of those cards for Invade to get out of hand like every time. Like all it really requires is that your opponent draws enough Invade early on to get ahead of you, and you draw poorly enough that you're not able to answer it and you get blown out. So it's about the same level as I would say an aggro deck is, which by itself is not bad. It'd be fine if this was just an aggro deck, but the fact that you can get cost reduction, there's a lot of card draw in Invade, and then you start getting random keywords very easily if it's not answered. Like, how do you kind of fix that? And there's a few ideas that I've heard, but one that I have heard and that I quite like is limiting the way that the keywords are applied. A lot of people say that they should be in a specific order, which I agree with, because the RNG aspect of it is not fun. Sometimes they'll be only getting one keyword, but they play that one Daedra that gets a guard, and you had just enough to get rid of that gate, but now you need to put damage elsewhere. Then you're not able to get rid of the gate that turn, and suddenly now they're getting 2 or 3, even 4 more keywords in the following turn, and that just even further reduces the likelihood that you're ever going to be able to interact with that gate. So I would go a step further. In my fantasy world, Invade would, it worked normally at these first 2 levels. I think giving the Daedra +1 health at level 1 and then at level 2 adding on the extra attack, I think that's fine. However, I think at level 3, instead of reducing the cost, that's when it starts applying keywords, but it's not random. Because I think what really gets under a lot of decks is the fact that your Daedra can start costing 1 less. So even if you're only invading 1 time a turn, so turn 1 you invade, turn 2 you invade, turn 3, suddenly on turn 4 you can play a 5 cost creature. You can even play a 6 cost creature if you have the ring, which is kind of absurd for your opponent to deal with. Like, if they're not running hard removal, which because of Invade, a lot of people run hard removal now. Like, it literally changed how a lot of people build their decks. This would, I think, reduce that like quite a bit. It would just prevent a lot more of the snowball that can happen. So I think the perfect order, at least in my head, so you start getting into the keywords at level 3. So at level 3 I would go with Regenerate, then Rally, Lethal, Breakthrough, Drain, Ward, Guard, and then Charge last. Maybe the order could be changed in some ways, but the keywords, like in that order, I think, like in that, especially those later ones, the Drain, Guard, Ward, and Charge, well, really just Ward, Guard, and Charge. That's the reason why the board state becomes so hard to gain back sometimes if Invade has gone off, because Charge and lethal creatures will just kill off your creature who's going to deal the most damage to the gate, and that creature was going to make it easier to remove in the coming turns. So it feels really bad when they're only getting like 2 or 3 keywords, and of course they get Charge and lethal, or they get Charge and Ward, and it's enough to take out that creature. And it feels even worse when it's like, I forget the name of the card, the 3/3 with charge, Zivlai Warlord. It feels really bad when that thing gets like ward and lethal off of like its 2 keywords that it's gonna get if the gate's at level 5 or whatever. So like basically the way that I ordered this, like it would make it easier to interact with, but like those early keywords that I threw in at the same time, like regenerate, rally, lethal, and breakthrough, and to kind of an extent drain, those don't really affect invade that much. Like, have you ever really had a situation where one of the Daedra got invade, or not got invade, but got regenerate, and like that blew you out? Like that's what stopped you from being able to do anything? Chances are not really. Like it would have to be a big thing that had guard that you just couldn't get past. That's the only time that happens. And the drain doesn't really apply to invade that much, but in certain situations it could. But invade doesn't really care about the health gain that it could get most of the time. So that's why I ordered things that way, like breakthrough. Sure, they can care about rally a little bit. That's why that's like the one questionable one that I put in a little earlier. But at the same time, they're getting buffs anyway. So that's my idea. I mean, like really, like I said earlier, when have you ever been completely stonewalled by invade because a card got regenerate on the first keyword or rally? It usually doesn't matter. So that, I think, creates a little bit more interactivity with it. Okay, so when it comes to like the Jaws of Oblivion set as a whole, like funnily enough, as much as everyone hates like this set of cards, I think it actually brought something useful to like just about every single archetype of deck that had already existed, you know, for the few years that like the game was around before this release. So like this set did at least have some really nice cards. Some of them are still broken though, so in another video we'll discuss those, like those really good cards that I think boosted some archetypes a little better. But we're still talking about toxic cards going on, so we're going to talk about some of those. And the first one we're going to talk about is the Gray Fox. The Gray Fox is an Empire and Telvanni's wet dream, because you get to steal like not just a powerful creature, but like literally any powerful card that, like, it could be an item, an action, like whatever, like they've previously played and is in their discard pile after that, and you can just put it in your hand, and whatever it is, you can use it when the situation calls for it. You know, if they've played Razum Dar and you've killed it, you can immediately pull it, and you're going to get immediate benefit out of a card like that. Something like if they've played a new era, you can immediately pull that and use it for yourself when you need it. Even if you're playing against aggro and it's been kind of like one of those really close games, you can pull something with charge and just win the game like that. So this card is just insane. Like, its Pilfer ability, like, okay, so it's never going to stay, like, it almost never stays alive long enough for it to use its Pilfer ability. But even, like, the effect of being able to reveal a random card from your opponent's hand is kind of also insane, because the only other cards that were ever able to do this before, they were more balanced by the fact that the 4-cost 2/2 was pulling, it was showing you cards from their entire deck, and you were just picking one to put in your hand. And the other one, I forget if it's a 5-cost, but it's the Thief of Dreams. You were literally shown 2 cards. One of them is in your opponent's hand, the other one isn't. And you have to pick which one you think is in their hand, and you draw that if you're right. If you're wrong, then you don't draw the card, but you then know that the other one's in their hand. The only other card that did something similar would be Razum Dar, because, you know, you draw a copy of the first card that your opponent draws that turn. It could also be on your turn. I have my own opinions about him, but we'll talk about that later. But like in control mirrors, the Gray Fox just absolutely like can just win you the game, because there's just so much value that can be gotten from this. Okay, I think this card should not exist. So in my opinion, Silence was kind of a premium, like in the early days of Legends. It was always on something like Bone Bow, where you had to already have a creature in play. The only like creatures that could silence things were Earthbone Spinner, Shadowfen Priest, and those were like relatively expensive, and they didn't have like the best stats for their cost for the most part. Um, like they were like really, they were really built for aggro, and sure, Mute could be, but the only things that are comparable to this is Suppress, which costs 0, but that only silences one creature, and it's also an action, and Hush. It costs the same as Mute. It does have Prophecy, but it also only silences one creature. So with those two other similar cards, like the other silence cards don't really matter, but I just don't know why you would run the other two cards in like, a normal deck if you have Mute. Like, why wouldn't you just want to silence two creatures with one card? Like, even if one of the other options has Prophecy or the other one costs 0 100% of the time, but they only silence one thing. Like, it'd be one thing if this forced you to silence two different creatures, but you can just put the effect on the same creature, and it's basically like it's basically the same as Hush at that point. Just you paid for it if it didn't come on Prophecy, which most of the time Hush doesn't, and it's also not really useful a lot of the time. Okay, so as everyone knows, so the game went into maintenance mode shortly after Jaws of Oblivion released. However, we did still get new monthly cards for almost a year after that happened, and none of them ever got balanced at all, or like considered for a quick fix after they got released, no matter how much of a problem they became. Like, I don't even know how to like voice my frustration about that, because cards have been changed in the past, even monthly cards. So we're gonna be going over them, and this is the first broken card. Ayleid Guardians is just absolutely broken the way that it's played now. So like every card in this game has pretty hard counters, and in my personal opinion, Ayleid Guardians has the same amount of hard counters that cards that are like unique legendaries like Parthenax have. Like in Parthenax's case, a simple banish effect will get rid of any chance the opponent has of replaying him, if he wasn't already copied through some, bullshit shenanigans, which happens. But he can also still kind of easily be killed and very easily removed. And it's also not super easy for the opponent to pull him back and play him in the same turn. What I mean by that, outside of cards like Reanimate, usually Parthenax is played with Soul Tear. So you have to, even if it's a free Soul Tear, you have to spend all or most of your Magicka, because it's a neutral card, so you could run it in Scout or Telvanni or Empire decks that like to ramp a lot. So you could play him in something like that and, do your Soul Tear. Even if it costs 3, you can play Parthenax and get all that value again, but it costs a lot of Magicka to do that. However, Ayleid Guardians is just different. So like, for one, because it spawns another copy of itself in the other lane, it usually requires multiple cards to answer this, like whether it's on the board or as removal from your hand. There are only a few 1-card counters to this that I can think of, and it's Lord of the Arena, which is I think it's an 11-cost red card, and you can have two creatures battle each other. So you could make the two Ayleid Guardians just battle each other. You could also red here, that will kill these, and Alduin. Other than that, there's no 1-card answers to this, And the worst part is that it takes so many resources to usually kill this, that it's also the fact that this effect is so easy to duplicate, especially in Telvanni. Like, it just makes this card kind of obscene sometimes, really offensive to me sometimes, because like in its color combo it has Telvanni, so like you can get stupid amounts of magicka, like I said earlier, to do these combos in one turn. So you can do a Night to Remember, Dark Rebirth. You could, if you've ramped enough, you can even do Abner Tharn and just get another Ayleid Guardian. And that's just like so much power that your opponent has to try to get through just to just to clear this. And the fact that you can just Soul Tear and this color combination and just pull 2 more down immediately. If you ramped enough, you can do it in one turn. If you have a 0 cost because you happen to play Parthenax, bam, 16 damage on the board immediately. So this is like one of the few cards that I think I have a really good fix for. And I think what I would do is put at the beginning of its summon ability, because it can keep the guard, it can keep the immune to lethal. I don't really care about that, because at this stage of the game, like, this can just get hard removed by like a multiple amount of cards. The problem is that there's 2 of them, and if you don't have 2 sources of removal, if you only have 1, you have to spend 1 on the one that you can't kill with just whatever you have on the board. So what I would do is, at the beginning of its summon ability, I would put, if Ayleid Guardian was played from your hand, then you can summon Ayleid Guardian in the other lane. So only if it got put in your hand and you're actually spending 11 magicka to play this could you get the other 8/8. I think that is completely fair, because cards like Golden Saint that spawn something like of pretty considerable strength. I mean, a 4/4 isn't as big as an 8/8, but this thing also has immune to lethal and just bigger stats in general. Like, that's conditional. You have to have more health for another Golden Saint to pop up, and that's not always possible to do. And I think that would kind of balance this out a little bit, because the way it is right now, it's just so annoying to get rid of as many of these that are likely to pop up consecutively and consistently, even just consistently. So I think they need a nerf like this that allows it to still be like an option for you to reanimate, because the immune to lethal in the guard, like 8/8 with a guard, is like nothing to sneeze at. But it can still be a powerful reanimate option, but it just won't completely like shut your opponent down and make them play every single card in their hand just to answer this like 2 or 3 times, as a lot of the other cards that I'm about to talk about and Ayleid Guardians. But really, like, unless it's like repeatedly pulling those kind of cards, like, then it's broken. Luckily, this is like kind of super weak against silence, unsummoning, and banish effects, so I don't have as much of a problem with this card compared to Ayleid Guardians. I mostly just wanted to mention that it is capable of bullshit, but it at least has many more counters that are more plentiful and more common than something like Ayleid Guardians, because this at least has like really the perfect setup for this is just your opponent like has to put something into this, and you draw a really good card off of it that already ended up in your discard pile. However, it's also not unlikely that it's going to get silenced, because silence is kind of a really huge thing that happens. It's probably the most common thing, I would say. Other than that, banish is probably the next thing that's going to happen to this, and then unsummoning isn't quite as common, but you still lose as a consumed card if this gets unsummoned, and you just can't even, like, because once a card's consumed, as the text reads, you remove the card from your discard pile from the game. So it basically is the same as banishing the card, but you get some kind of benefit when you consume cards. So I think this has a little bit more counterplay. This one's a little bit more balanced, but as I said before, it is possible for it to perform some kind of bullshit that you're not prepared for. So in my opinion, I think this probably made move archer decks go like a little bit over the top if they draw this really early, because this thing can be a huge pain in the ass to remove. I don't know why they didn't treat this like I think it's Wild Boar, that, you know, like it moves every turn, but they prevented it from being like really ridiculous by preventing it from getting cover when it moves into the shadow lane. So that way your opponent's creatures can at least like attack it and do something to it. And that's why I think this card is pretty strong against certain decks. Like, because like if this comes down on like, you know, turn 4, like other than hard removal and, you know, some intelligence removals, like if you're just not playing that kind of deck, then how do you get rid of this? It's just going to keep moving. It's going to gain cover every other turn, so you can't even really reliably play anything in the shadow lane to try and get rid of it. Even like a guard isn't really going to be the most useful thing, because it can do 2 damage to it immediately, even if you preemptively put it there. And green does have finish off, so they can just kill it and keep doing the pilfer ability. And then I think on top of that, I think what really puts it over the top is the fact that even if they don't play this like with the ring and they play this on turn 5, move archer can easily have like an 8 power creature by this time because of all the move buffs that happen. So it's not like the most egregious thing out there, but you just wait until we talk about the next card. But yeah, this card can be really, really fucking annoying to deal with. Okay, it is time for my absolute least favorite card in the whole game. Workshop. Workshop should not cost 3 fucking magicka. Like, this is like, absolutely, this is one of the worst balanced cards in the entire game. Like, even if you just look at this and you're like, you've been playing the game for a while, you can just think of the implications. Like, you play this, you activate it, and, you know, once you activate it, you can get 6 free shouts from Parthenax. Every factotum will get both of its abilities for free, and especially if you play Assembled Titan, giving 4 damage, like deal 4 damage to your opponent, gain 4 health to every factotum in your deck, and being able to do it twice. Being able to draw 2 shouts from Greybeard Mentors. And I think the worst one is Mechanical Ally, being able to drop 2 Spider Workers that each of them are also going to draw 2 cards. I don't know, like, this is one of like the last cards. This is like the second or like third or fourth to last card. It was like one of the very last cards added into the game. Like, Sparky Pants either did not think this one through enough, they didn't test it as much, or both. This thing should cost like at least 6 magicka, or just not exist. This is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, this is a card like Invasion Party, and I forget the name of the goblin, but it costs like 4, and it gives all your other goblins +2/+2. Like, that's the reason why so many people who are like kind of serious about this game, they ban these cards in tournaments, because they're absolutely stupid. Like anyone who puts any thought into this game like hates running into this. It's the reason why I put so much support removal like in my decks outside of like Altar of Despair, because Altar of Despair, like, at least it takes some amount of time for them to, you know, do anything with, and it takes like a lot of setup. But this card takes like almost no setup, and this card is so fucking cheap. Like, it is not impossible to play this and follow it up with a really powerful neutral card, like, which most neutral cards are not really that powerful, but if their summon ability happens twice, then that's when it becomes overpowered. So like, the people who play this, they either just don't realize it, like, that this is like cancer, or they're kind of just too much of a dick to care about it. And yeah, I said what I said. And if you've ever seen me use any of these cards, I mean, I'll never use Workshop, but occasionally I'll use Alien Guardians. I'll use like 1 copy. Cards like even a New Era that I didn't talk about, I'll run like 1 or 2, sure, in certain decks as like an oh shit button. But, you know, mind your business. I'm just kidding. I try to not be a dick when it comes to what people play, but Workshop is just one of those cards. Like, this should just not exist. Okay, quite the rant there. But I wanted to talk about these cards before I do serious work on. I don't know if I forget if I mentioned it earlier, but on the tier list video that I'm working on, or series, whatever that turns out to be. And also, before I start like getting input from all the people that I have asked to help out with it, and the ones that have agreed so far, because that project is going to be a huge undertaking in terms of organizing between myself and about like the 8 other content creators and top 100 players that have agreed. And it's going to take a lot of editing, recording, all the collaborations. It's going to be a lot to accomplish, but until then, I'm still going to be uploading Legends content, but it won't be any kind of serious ranked gameplay, I should say, or actually trying to climb the ladder. Like I said earlier, I pretty much just want to goof off and not really take the game seriously. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed my rant. If you guys agree or disagree, you have your own opinions on some of these cards or even other ones, I welcome the input. Like I said, I'm working on this tier list video, and I'm working with a lot of other people to make it. I'm getting I'm going to try to get a lot of opinions on certain things, mechanics, cards, entire sets of cards, and all that. So, any little opinion that can go, if that video or this video magically reaches, the gods at Bethesda, I think that they would really value everyone, all of the players' input into it. So, feel free to throw all that in there. Until next time, I'm going to catch you guys later, and I hope you all have an amazing day.